Markets from a jobs to be done perspective don't change that quickly. And here's the thing. When you expunge technology and solutions from your language, you tend to have artifacts and models that have a lot of longevity. They're not volatile. They don't change as technology changes. They're stable over time. So once you create some background and some models and artifacts around jobs to be done, they tend to stay valid for a very long time. 5 years later, you can go back to a job map and it's the same thing. Because the job doesn't change. The job changes less frequently than technology changes.
Welcome to the Product People podcast, where we learn from amazing product leaders about product management, growth, and product ops. I'm today's host, Mirela Mus, founder and CPO at Product People. Today's guest is Jim Kalbach, Chief Evangelist at Mural, a visual work platform. He wrote 2 books, The Jobs to be Done Playbook and Mapping Experiences. This is the second part of the episode with our guest. If you haven't listened to the first part of the episode, be sure to do so.
And I think this is a perfect time to also move to outcomes, where I understand is how the job performer measures the success of getting the job done. And because I know there's a lot of talk in product management on outcomes versus outputs. So people listening to the podcast know that this is the context we're using it right now.
In that case, the outcome is not the business outcome. I'm using the term in the jobs to be done framework that I put forth. I'm not using the word outcome as the business outcome, because typically when you're product management and you're talking about outcomes, you're talking about what the business outcome is. You want more users to download your app, or you want to have more sales and things like that. In this case, I'm using the word outcome specifically from the individual's perspective. Is how do they measure success, which may not be something that is necessarily quantifiable because it's their perception. Right? If I'm executing a job, let's say preparing a meal or commuting to work, right? There might be some things in there that I could measure, like reduce the amount of time it takes for me to get to public transportation. I just made that up as an outcome statement. You could actually go out with a stopwatch and measure the time that it takes me to do that. But you might also have an outcome statement that is much more experiential or perceptual. So when we talk about outcomes, it's in the mind of the job performer. It's how they measure success, right? And it's not with a checklist or anything that we can necessarily measure. It's their measures of success.
And I know one of the suggestions was also on product managers. How do then they tie in the jobs to be done they've created and validated through development and product delivery?
From my perspective, jobs to be done is complementary to a lot of existing techniques and processes that are out there. I don't see jobs to be done as something that replaces what you're already doing. I think it actually enhances what you're already doing. And it enhances it specifically by identifying the problem that you need to solve. Not your business problem, but the customer problem that you're trying to solve. And it gives you confidence and focus, right? So we're focused on a specific problem, and we have confidence that that's the problem to solve. Now, most techniques and methodologies out there have the starting point is, what problem are you trying to solve? Let's just take a design sprint as an example. What problem are you trying to solve? Okay. If you did the jobs to be done research, you can translate that into a how might we statement. How might we help people reduce the stress of commuting to work, right? If you're doing a roadmap exercise, though, to some degree, you have the same question is you have divisions of time, usually a month or a quarter. What are we focused on this quarter as a team, right? And very often that's driven by revenue or technology or resources or something like that. What you can do is actually bring the jobs to be done framework in and say, this quarter, we're going to help commuters reduce the amount of stress that they have while going to work. In other words, that can be an input into your road mapping exercise. If you do lean startup, you need a hypothesis. We believe that if we do this, we'll see outcomes. You can use the jobs to be done framework to fill in that hypothesis statement as well, too. So basically what I want to say is that jobs to be done tells you what problem to solve, and it gives you a lot of focus and confidence over there. And then that plugs into a lot of the solutioning methods that we have, whether it's brainstorming or design or lean or agile sprints. What is the sprint? What are we doing in this sprint? Or road mapping? It can be the answer where you have a slot in all of those methods. What problem are you trying to solve? You can bring your answer from jobs to be done right in there and then use that technique and go off in solution.
Do you have things that you've noticed work better at a different company stage or type of business model compared to others
Yeah,
in your
that's
experience?
one of the things that's really interesting about jobs to be done is you don't need a product because we're expunging technology and solutions from our language. It doesn't matter if you have a product on the market or not. So very often I find it very good. And I have a couple of articles on this where I believe, and in some of my own work as well, too, I've seen this where jobs to be done is really good for startups because what it can do is to help them focus where they're going to put their attention. Of course, startups are very small and nimble and they like to pivot and things like that. But jobs to be done can actually constrain that and reduce the number of pivots that you have to make by giving you a clear signal on the problem you're trying to solve. However, most people, I think, are in a situation where they have an existing product. And that poses a lot of challenges for folks because they're trying to harmonize this mindset shift that I talked about with the actual product. And it's quite hard to actually put that aside and not think through the lens of your own product. However, if you're able to do that, what jobs to be done can help you do is see things in a different light. So new opportunities emerge, right? And that's really the mindset shift and the perspective shift that jobs to be done can benefit you from is helping you see things in a different light. You may or may not find new opportunities, but very often you go, we never thought about it that way. And it gives you new ideas for improvement and for innovation of an existing product. So it could be a company that's not on the market, or it could be an existing company. It could be large products. I have a lot of people say, yeah, but our field is really complex. And it's like, no, you can actually use jobs to be done there as well too. It applies to large, complex software as well as, single products.
And that was also the gist from Christensen's book.
Yeah.
Because his examples were the US government or super large organizations. And I think on A16Z podcast, where he had an appearance many, many years ago, he was talking about IKEA, that IKEA solves the job that you need to furnish your whole place tomorrow. You move to a new city, a semi-empty apartment, and you need everything by tomorrow. And that's the job IKEA solves.
Yeah.
And that was interesting for me, how you can shrink
that's right.
The statement, but you can also expand it to a lot of other mini jobs that are included in the larger job.
And I think what jobs to be done brings with it, as I said, is focus. And, part of the challenge of being in a large, complex B2B environment, real estate or pharma or law, legal systems, you might say, oh, there's lots of stakeholders and lots of jobs. And that's exactly the problem that innovators have is they need to sort all of that out. And jobs to be done forces you to do that. It's almost uncomfortable for some people to use jobs to be done because what it does is it requires you to put focus on something. And what you end up having are teams going, yeah, but what about that? What about that stakeholder? What about that job? What about that job? And that's actually where innovation fails is when you lose your focus. So jobs to be done helps cut through all of that and say, we're going to focus on this right now. It doesn't forget about all the other aspects, but you're able to focus. And I think that's where innovation is the best is when you focus and not try to play 3-dimensional chess and just focus on one thing.
What's your take on assessing competition with also the same jobs to be done lens? As I love this joke about the SaaS tools don't compete with each other. They compete sometimes with doing nothing or hiring an intern.
I think, there's two parts there that I'd like to kind of answer with. One is you can actually use jobs to be done as a way to look at how well you're serving your customers versus a competitor, like a direct competitor. What that involves is comparison. For instance, I mentioned a job map, which is a chronological sequence of the steps. You can create a job map, which is independent of anybody's technology, and then compare yourself to it and compare a competitor to it as well. So the idea of understanding the problem, but then comparing to it is a really powerful tool because then we can see things through a different lens. And by different lens, I mean, typically a competitor comparison is let's list all of our features and price points and compare our competitor to that. That's what you typically do. If you're looking at it through the lens of a job, it actually opens things up because you're not looking at it feature by feature. You're looking at it as step by step or outcome by outcome, right? What that allows you to do is actually compare solutions that aren't direct competitors of yours as defined by the industry analysts, right? So just as an example, here at Mural, we're a digital whiteboard, right? One of our biggest competitors, particularly before the pandemic, so let's think a little bit before the pandemic, but even to some degree now, one of our biggest competitors was the sticky note, the physical
And the flip chart.
the chart and the whiteboard in an office, right? So before the pandemic, people said, "Yeah, but I got a sticky note and a whiteboard right here," right? So we could compare ourselves to other software, but with jobs to be done, we can actually compare a virtual whiteboard to a physical one because you're not looking at features. Because if you look at the feature set of a virtual whiteboard, it's not going to map to the features of a sticky note, right? But if you look at it through the jobs to be done lens, you can absolutely compare those two things together.
Yeah, that's true. And it was a very welcome shift to digital whiteboard solutions because I remember as well before the pandemic, everyone wanted to go into a room and use a flip chart or sticky notes and all that. And then you had to take pictures of those, but no one bothered to
Right.
digitalize them. So you just had like these pictures with unclear handwriting of like some things we put there.
That's
And,
right.
and then I definitely like more the version where we have something stored and easier to access.
It took the pandemic for that realization to kind of happen in the marketplace. But what Jobs to be Done does is it helps you predict where the market's going to go. Because markets, as they mature, they will cover more and more needs that the market has naturally. So what's marked as an unmet need today may not be an unmet need in 5 years from now because the market will eventually catch up. The solution will cover more and more needs. What Jobs to be Done does is it helps you stay ahead of the competition by predicting what the unmet needs are ahead of your competitors, right? And to do that, you need that mindset shift we don't compete with other whiteboards. We compete with sticky notes. That helps you see where those unmet needs might be. Another example of that is Scott Cook, the CEO of Intuit, which is a big tax software company here in the US. It makes tax software. He said that our software competes with the pencil, right? Because when you're filling out your taxes once a year, you might have complicated forms, but then you need to do a quick calculation. And even to this day, to some degree, people use a pencil to do that, right? It's like, if we can be easier and better than the pencil to fill out your tax forms, we'll win. Not, we got to beat the competition of other tax softwares. We got to beat the pencil, right? So just that thinking actually shifts your mindset.
It also drives down to awareness because people using the pencil maybe
Yeah.
don't know that it's a better solution
Totally.
out there. And how would you use it specifically to monitor how the market is changes? I really like your statement that as the market matures more, then these needs get met more and more, or the needs of the people evolve.
I've actually not done that type of monitoring over time. However, I have heard of people who actually rerun the survey. So I mentioned Jobs to be Done has a qualitative part and then a quantitative part. On the quantitative part in particular, you can actually rerun that survey and see how things are changing. Typically, though, markets from a Jobs to be Done perspective don't change that quickly. And here's the thing. When you expunge technology and solutions from your language, you tend to have artifacts and models that have a lot of longevity. They're not volatile. They don't change as technology changes. They're stable over time. So once you create some background and some models and artifacts around Jobs to be Done, they tend to stay valid for a very long time. 5 years later, you can go back to a job map and it's the same thing. Because the job doesn't change. The job changes less frequently than technology changes. So I just wanted to make that point. But then going back to your question, what that means is even if you do the survey a year later or 2 years later, things may not move that quickly. So theoretically, you can track that, but you're not necessarily trying to monitor that. You might want to redo the survey to get new signal on what's the unmet need, maybe 2 years apart.
Hey, if you're enjoying this Product People podcast, check out our weekly live streams on LinkedIn and YouTube. Back to the episode.
You mentioned that jobs to be done are technology agnostic, also to take away people from the solution space. Have there been cases where technology really changed the jobs of people and then that needed to still be taken into play?
Yeah, there are situations. I've thought a lot about this. I did some projects for people working in software security. So they did network security. Like, well, how do we talk about network security in a way that doesn't mention technology? It can be done. It becomes a little bit more abstract, but it can be done. But that job didn't exist before there were networks, right? So it's not a job that's been around for centuries and centuries, let's say, like preparing a meal or something simple like that. So there are.
Protecting the castle against invaders.
Right. Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. But then that becomes too abstract, like, because then you might frame the job as, yeah, what's the job of protecting something is, well, like, could you do a job to be done analysis on that? It's like, yes, but it'll be so generic that it won't tell you anything.
Mhm.
So at some point in time, completely new spaces like SEO, at search engine optimization, you might talk, that's about awareness as well, too. And when we had telephone books, there was, how do people find me in the telephone book, right? Okay, now it's how do they find me on. So you might say SEO has its roots elsewhere, but it's so unique. The technological aspects of it create a new space that you have to kind of look at it in that context. Another one is VR. That's another
Yep.
great example. Is like, how do you talk about the needs and the process of VR without talking about the technology? It can be done. I'll just tell you that right now. But then the question is that too abstract for the innovation team to get any signal from it? So I think there needs to be a little bit of pragmatic thinking that you bring to it as well, too.
Mhm.
What I like to assume is I can talk about any field or any industry and talk about it independent of specific technologies, right? There might be general technology involved, like a network server or the internet or online, just generically, but I'm not going to mention any brand names or I'm not going to mention any specific types of technology in there. So I believe it's possible to describe any domain independent of technology. At some point, though, it might not be useful for your actual team. So I like to bring a pragmatic approach into it as well, too.
And that also leads to a question. Is there some use case or some type of setup where the people shouldn't use jobs to be done? Where what would you recommend against it? I know this is a bit of a controversial question, but I like defining limitations as well.
I think there are two things actually. Sometimes I'll do, coaching or people come to me for advice and, I'm listening to their situation, their problems, and I'll ask them, I'll say, why do you want jobs to be done? How is jobs to be done going to help you? So, even though I wrote a book on the topic and I teach on the topic and here we are talking about it on this podcast, it's not a cure all. It doesn't replace everything that you have. It doesn't solve all of your problems and it might not be the right method at the right time for the right people. So I think you need to think about that. There are two things that come to mind. One is I've found that teams need to be ready to adopt jobs to be done. There needs to be some imperative to transform the way they think about their markets. If you just bring it in as a band-aid, so you have a very, very tech-focused company and you bring jobs to be done, it's probably not going to change their mindset. So there has to be a willingness and a readiness and an imperative to transform the way you think about your customers. And I like to work with teams that are a little bit more advanced. So maybe they've done, customer discovery methods before and they're ready to improve on those. But if you've never done customer discovery before in a formal way, it's possible to start with jobs to be done, but it's going to be harder. The other thing with jobs to be done is where you are in your thinking. And it's related to my first answer. But my second answer is also where you are in your cycles. Let's just say your development cycles or whatever cycles they are. And I've had sometimes people, we've already done this innovation project and we're in the middle of agile sprints. How will jobs be done help us? And I said, probably won't. Probably too late because of what I said before. Jobs to be done is really about the problem you're trying to solve. And it's the input into solution. If you're already well into the solution, I'm already in development, agile cycles and all that kind of thing. Jobs to be done can add some flavor there, but it's not going to have the same impact.
I mean, it could be used as a sanity test. If I'm thinking of ourselves as product people, we get thrown in the middle of this because we're, like no one wakes up in the morning and say, oh yeah, let me bring an external consultancy. So usually we're brought in when things fall apart to some degree, either from people capacity or other topics. And many times it has been helpful to just reassess the terrain because
Right.
they would be exactly in the situation that you're mentioning. Oh yeah, we've done everything. We just need someone to do delivery.
Uh,
And then you see that there are like a lot of things that weren't clear, like go-to-market pricing, or there's some obvious things that you would have thought of in the beginning, but you also can't interrupt delivery because officially they bring us in for delivery. So we've had a lot of cases where we had to backtrack and do some hush user research or figure out where we are so that we can at least course correct, or when people want to hear another opinion, we can be ready with the correct one.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, jobs to be done can help you reframe your thinking at any point, in your process, whether you're way up front, before you innovate, or all the way at the end. But the key word in what you just said was backtrack. Backtrack means you should have done this earlier. And I think that's the point of my answer, is that jobs to be done has the biggest impact when it's the input into what's solution, because it's really about what's the problem we're trying to solve, and the problem from the customer standpoint, not your business problem. It's what's the customer problem we're supposed to solve. If that's the input into your solutioning, you don't have to backtrack.
That's amazing, Jim.
Thanks for listening to this Product People podcast. If you found it useful, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating. For more info, visit getproductpeople.com and see you next time.